And so, hello there, and welcome back to another Nights the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm talking about what I mean by the Wes Anderson Problem, and how it relates to Oppenheimer and Barbie, which are both currently in cinemas. But before I do that, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello there to my viewers, but you prefer to listen to your podcast, well, you can do this one at Night of the Movies on Spotify. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out visually on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform too. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and leave me some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts as well, because feedback is much appreciated and there is always things to improve on. Also, I should say here, and people who've been following my channel will know the drill, will know what I'm about to say, it is still the ongoing saga of hay fever. Yes, we're in the summer right now as I'm recording this podcast, and that's when hay fever is often at its worst, and I get hay fever quite badly, and so I might be sniffling quite a lot throughout this podcast, and if I do apologise, and also I might sound a bit bummed up, and it's just because that's what hay fever does to you. And I'm feeling a bit under the weather too. I'm going to mention this. Yes, I'm feeling a bit under the weather because of hay fever. So if this podcast isn't the best, blame hay fever. But other than that, this should be a great and fun podcast to listen to and or watch. So, let's get into it. The Wes Anderson Problem and how it relates to Barbie and Oppenheimer. So, recently, as I'm recording this podcast today, we have just had the release of Barbie and Oppenheimer, two films which are sweeping the box office, and yeah, getting a load of people back to cinemas, which is always great because Indiana Jones didn't do that, The Flash didn't do that, and I don't know many other films that are going to do that for the rest of the year, maybe June too, but the point I'm making is it's great that people are going back to the cinemas to go and see Barbie and Oppenheimer, and I went to go and see Barbie and Oppenheimer last week, well, this week, kind of this week, but last week now. It's this week as I'm recording this podcast, but it's last week as this podcast comes out. But I've seen both the movies now, and I didn't like Barbie too much. It just wasn't my sort of movie, but I absolutely adored Oppenheimer. But the thing is, I have a problem with both of those movies, and I didn't discuss this problem in either of my views of either of those films. I didn't discuss this problem in any of those reviews because I want to do a separate video on it, because if I spoke about this problem, it would be like a 20-minute segment in either of those reviews, and I'll just take up most of the reviews when I could just talk about this separately, which is what I'm doing right now. So, the thing is, right, Barbie has this huge cast for a loads of famous actors. You've got Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, Kate McKinnon, and you've also got America Ferrera, you've got Simu Liu, Kingsley Ben-Adir, Ncuti Gatwa, who's going to be the new Doctor Who, Emma Mackey, Dua Lipa, Will Ferrell, and so on and so on and so on. A lot of famous people. Oppenheimer also has a huge cast. Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Florence Pugh, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Rami Malek, Alden Ehrenreich, Kenneth Branagh, Matthew Modine, Jack Quaid, Dane DeHaan, Casey Affleck, Gary Oldman, and so on and so on and so on. These movies have huge casts, and I think it slightly becomes their downfall, at least for me. This is probably just the me problem. I mean, other people might have this problem as well, but I don't really hear them talk about it. But for me, when I watch a film with a humongous cast like Barbie and Oppenheimer have, it takes me out of the movie. It can become an unengaging experience because I'm going, oh, that's, in the case of Barbie, okay, that's Margot Robbie who played Birds of Prey, who played Harley Quinn in Birds of Prey and the Suicide Squad and so on and so on and so on. Okay, that's Margot Robbie. She was in, she played Harley Quinn, she was in Wolf of Wall Street, she was in Babylon, she's been in all these different movies. Oh, that's Ryan Gosling of Nice Guys, Blade Runner 2049, La La Land. Okay, that's Dua Lipa, the famous artist, not really sure why she's here, but okay. Simu Liu, who played Shang-Chi, oh, he's in this film. I find it a bit difficult to differentiate between him and Shang-Chi in this movie, though, just because I know him for that character so well. And then you get Ncuti Gatwa and Emma Mackey in the same movie too, and yet you see them quite a lot together in Sex Education. And sign on here, I do think Greta Gerwig, who wrote and directed Barbie, is a huge fan of Sex Education, because she got 3 of the main stars of that show in this movie, in Barbie. She got Ncuti Gatwa, who's one of the main stars of Sex Education, Emma Mackey, who's the lead female in Sex Education, and Connor Swindle, who plays Adam in Sex Education. She got all of them in the same movie. And the thing is, in Barbie, right, there's scenes between Ncuti Gatwa, and again, I might pronounce his name, I'm going to do apologise, and Emma Mackey, and you're watching the scenes together and they're going, oh, they're the two out of Sex Education. Why did you place them together in so many scenes, though? I don't fully understand that. And then Michael Cera's popping up, and I'm a big fan of Michael Cera. I find him really funny, particularly since I first saw him in Arrested Development. But then every single time I'm seeing Michael Cera as just Alan in Barbie, it's reminding me of Arrested Development. And that was one of my problems with Barbie. I didn't speak about it as my Barbie review, but it really... It gave me a bit of an unengaging experience, because I wanted to get into the film a lot more, but then at one point, and this isn't really a spoiler, but at one point, John Cena has a cameo in the film. I won't say what he's playing, but he has a cameo in the film, and it took me out of it, and all I could see was John Cena. That's all I could see at that point in the movie. I mean, I get that might be the joke, but I found it more jarring than funny. And I had that problem with Oppenheimer as well. Now, I think Oppenheimer is a near-perfect film. I absolutely loved it. My favourite film of the year so far. But the thing is, though, when... in the first half an hour of Oppenheimer, it didn't really affect me in the later... in the second half of Oppenheimer, God, what am I saying? It didn't really affect me so much in the second half of Oppenheimer, but it did a bit in the first half. Like, I was watching the first half of Oppenheimer, I was going, oh, that's Cillian Murphy. Oh, that's Matt Damon. Oh, that's Florence Pugh. Oh, that's Robert Downey Jr. That's Alden Ehrenreich, who played young Han Solo in Solo: A Star Wars Story. Oh, that's Jack Quaid, which I know from The Boys and Scream 5. Oh, that's Kenneth Branagh, who, you know, I know from his Pro movies and various other roles he's done, and the previous Christopher Nolan films he's starred in, such as Tenet, Dunkirk, and he was in another one, wasn't he? Well, he's been in this one as well. So yeah, I'm watching all these actors pop up on screen and going, oh, where do I know him from? Or where do I know them from? You know, that's the point I'm making. It becomes a rather unengaging experience, because I'm sitting there going, oh, that's Cillian Murphy. I know him from Peaky Blinders. He was in A Quiet Place Part 2. He's been in many previous Christopher Nolan films too. And I'm looking at Matt Damon going, oh, that's Matt Damon of Good Will Hunting, Ford v Ferrari, and so on and so on. I'm looking at Robert Downey Jr. going, well, he's very different in this than he is as Iron Man, but he's also played other roles. But other roles he's played, that's what I'm feeling like. That's what I'm thinking when I'm watching these famous actors in these movies. And it's not to say they're giving up bad performances. It's not. But for me, I find it hard to fully get into their characters, fully invest in their characters, when there's so many famous actors, and that's taken me out of it, because I start to feel like I'm watching the actor and not the character. That was more happening with Barbie. It didn't happen with Oppenheimer so much, because, as I've already mentioned, about halfway into Oppenheimer, I settled into it, and I didn't really care about the cast so much, because I was just finding everything else so engrossing. But in Barbie, and if you watch behind the scenes, this is particularly reinforced in the behind-the-scenes footage. You know, it feels like everyone's having way too much fun on set, and that they're not... I mean, I don't want to say this, because the chances are, you know, they were all giving them all to their characters, and they are all really good actors in Barbie. But for me, when I was watching that movie, it felt like they weren't giving their all into the characters and having a bit too much fun on set. And I do think that slightly comes across in the film, because I never felt like I was watching the characters that these actors were playing. I mean, I did with Ryan Gosling as Ken to a degree, but I also didn't with certain other actors in that movie, and I felt like I was just watching the actor and not the character. particularly felt that with Will Ferrell in the film. And I'm someone who is a fan of Will Ferrell. I'm not a huge fan of Will Ferrell, but I like him every time he pops up in a movie. You know, I often find him quite funny for the most part. And I think he was great in Stranger Than Fiction, which I think is his most underrated role. But he's also great as Elf. You know, he's also great in Elf and so on and so on and so on. But you get the point I'm making. You know, I never felt like I was watching the character that Will Ferrell was playing in Barbie, to the point that I don't even know what his character's name was, because I just felt like I was watching Will Ferrell. Same with America Ferrera in that film, and I even said this in my Barbie review. Every time America Ferrera spoke in Barbie, it just reminded me of Astrid, the character she voices in the How to Train Your Dragon films. And it takes me out of it. And the reason I call this the Wes Anderson problem is because I started to notice it a lot with Wes Anderson's films, particularly over the past decade or so, the films he released over the past decade, because they all have huge, and I mean huge casts. And the cast for Wes Anderson films just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, you look at his cast for Moonrise Kingdom, loads of famous stars in that movie. You look at his cast for Grand Budapest Hotel, loads of famous actors. You look at his cast for The French Dispatch, and this is where I really started to notice it. It's just gigantic. His cast is humongous. You look at the cast for French Dispatch, and I remember watching that in the cinema and enjoying parts of it, but not getting into it as much as I wanted to, because I was going, oh, that's Jeffrey Wright, who I know from Westworld and The Batman. Oh, that way he wasn't the Batman by that point, but you get the point. You know, I was watching the French Dispatch going, oh, that's Adrian Brody, which I know from Peter Jackson's King Kong. That's Saoirse Ronan, who I don't know her from. Well, you know, that's Edward Norton. That's such and such a body. That's such and such a body. Oh, there's all these famous actors, and it's not, if anything, it's taken me out of the movie more than it's, you know, getting me engaged in the film. It's taken me out of it because I'm seeing all these famous actors and trying to remember where I remember them from. And also, if I've heard an actor was going to be in the movie, like I remember before the French Dispatch, I'd heard that Willem Dafoe was in the film. When I hear an actor's going to be in a movie, in the case of the French Dispatch with Willem Dafoe, I was waiting for his appearance in that film. And he's only in it, from what I remember. I haven't seen the film since I first saw it when I saw it in the cinema, all the way back in 2021, which is a weird phrase to say now, all the way back in 2021, when in reality that was only like 2 years ago. But I remember hearing that Willem Dafoe was going to be in the film, and I was waiting for his appearance, and he's only in it for, what I remember, like 30 seconds. He's barely in that film, but I was waiting for his appearance because I heard he was going to be in the film. And the thing is, you hear about all these cast members and all these really famous actors going to work on a Wes Anderson film now, and I'm just not loving it anymore. It really became the case of the French Dispatch, and I spoke about it, I think, a bit in my French Dispatch review, but I didn't speak about it that much, and it only really started to kick in after I did my review of the French Dispatch on this channel about 2 years ago. That it only started to kick in after I did that review what my big problem with the film was. And I know it might sound a bit silly, but my big problem with the French Dispatch was that it had a cast that was too big, with too many famous actors. It's one of the reasons that I didn't go to check out Wes Anderson's latest film, Asteroid City, which came out a couple of months ago now. It's one of the reasons I didn't go to watch that film at the cinema, because you look at the cast for that movie, everybody's in it. Literally everybody's in it, and I didn't want to go and have another experience at the cinema where I'm going, oh, where do I know that actor from? I didn't know that actor was in here. Where do I know them from? Or I didn't know she was in here. Where do I know her from? I didn't want to have another experience like that in the cinema, because that's what happened to me in the French Dispatch. And the thing is, I will watch Asteroid City. I will watch it when it comes onto Disney Plus, probably sometime within the next couple of months. But I'm not going to lie and say I'm excited to see the film anymore, which is saddening to say from someone like me who is I consider myself a Wes Anderson fan. You know, Rushmore is in my top 20 favourite films. That was his second film, if I'm not mistaken, that he directed. I love that film to pieces. And the thing is, I love Rushmore. Well, one of the reasons I love Rushmore, I love Rushmore for many reasons. It's, in my opinion, a perfect coming-of-age film. But another reason that I love Rushmore is because it only has 5 huge actors in the film. It's got Jason Schwartzman, who wasn't even big when that film came out, at least I don't think he was. You've got Bill Murray, you've got Luke Wilson, you've got Olivia Williams, and you've got Brian Cox. Brian Cox, the actor, by the way, not the scientist. The actor of Succession, which many people now love as Logan Moore. You've got 5 big actors in that film, but it doesn't take you out of it, and I can get past if there's about 5, 6 or 7 main big actors in a movie, if they're leading the film, I can get past that in the first 5 minutes, because I can get used to it. I just can. I don't know what it is, but I can just get used to it when there's about 5, 6 or 7 main actors, big star, big name actors in a movie, and they're introduced in the first 5 to 10 minutes, or even in the first 20 minutes. I can get used to it, which is one of the reasons I think Rushmore works so well, because it doesn't have that huge cast for the loads of actors that keep coming in and out of the movie. I can just settle down and go, okay, these are 5 main actors. They're all big. Yeah, that's Bill Murray, and I love them off Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day. Yes, that's Brian Cox, and yeah, they're big famous actors, but okay, I can settle into this though, because there's only them. But then when I was watching something like The French Dispatch, which has all these actors coming in and out of the film, because it's done in certain sections from what I remember. Like, I remember watching the film and Edward Norton came in from what felt like an hour and a half into the film. So, I was watching The French Dispatch and it kept being quite unengaged and experienced, because I was going, they're famous, and there's also a part of me when that's happening that is thinking, I wonder if they get along behind the scenes. Now, I don't know why I think that. I really don't. I mean, one of the reasons I may think that, I generally don't know if this is the reason, but one of the reasons I may think that, when I'm watching the film, whether they get along behind the scenes, is because Wes Anderson is famous for having these huge cast dinners on his set when he gets all the cast members of a film he gets all the cast members to come to this dinner where they all go and share experiences. Many of the actors who've worked on a Wes Anderson film have spoken about that before, and it's one of the reasons, it sounds like, I don't know this for certain, but it's one of the reasons that I think Wes Anderson gets many huge name actors to come and work on his films, because they're all attracted to the idea of these cast dinners. That's what it sounds like. A lot of the actors rave about that on a Wes Anderson set. And so maybe that's one of the reasons I'm sitting there whilst watching a Wes Anderson film and going, I wonder if these 2 actors got along behind the scenes. I'm wondering what the cast dinner was like between these 2 actors. I felt like that when I was watching Ray Fiennes in scenes with Jude Law. I think he's in scenes with Jude Law, if I'm not mistaken, but he's in scenes with plenty of famous actors in the Grand Budapest Hotel. When I rewatched that film a couple of years ago, I felt a bit like that. Like, I wonder if Ray Fiennes actually got along with these actors behind the scenes of this film. And I'm never gonna know that, but the point is, it's another reason that's taken me out of the film. It's another thing that's taken me out of the movie, because I'm thinking that whilst I'm watching Ray Fiennes the film, and I don't feel like I'm watching his character anymore. I feel like I'm watching Ray Fiennes play whoever he plays in the Grand Budapest Hotel. I forgot off the top of my head right now, but you understand the point. And the reason I'm calling it the Wes Anderson problem is because it seems to happen with me and most of the Wes Anderson movies I watch, particularly his latest films. It's not just him. Obviously, it's not just him. There's loads of films with huge casts. You look at some of Paul Thomas Anderson's earlier movies, like Boogie Nights or like Magnolia, and those films, by the way, Magnolia is my 2nd favourite film of all time, or my 3rd favourite film of all time, depending on where I rank Empire Strikes Back and Last Crusade, but Magnolia, side note, is my 3rd favourite film of all time. Love that movie. But the thing is though, Magnolia and Boogie Nights, as I was saying, have these huge casts, loads of famous actors. But the thing is though, I don't know what it is about Paul Thomas Anderson, but he makes that work. He sort of embraces it, and at the same time, you don't feel after a while like you're watching the actors. You feel like you're watching the characters. And I particularly felt that with Magnolia. Like, one of the main stars of Magnolia is William H. Macy. And whenever I see William H. Macy, it usually reminds me of his role, in Jurassic Park 3, because that's where I first saw him. But when I was watching him in Magnolia, I didn't feel that. Same with John C. Reilly. Whenever I see John C. Reilly on screen, it usually reminds me of Step Brothers, but it didn't in Magnolia. And I had a similar experience when I was watching Boogie Nights. You know, that film has Mark Wahlberg in the leading role, but I never felt like I was watching Mark Wahlberg off the Ted movies when I was watching that. I felt like I was watching him play this character. I felt like I was watching the character he was playing. Same with Philip Seymour Hoffman in that film, same with Don Cheadle in that film, and same with John C. Reilly, who's also in that movie, and Burt Reynolds as well. Though Paul Thomas Anderson embraces that whole idea that that's Burt Reynolds in that film. You know, that's one of the reasons I think the huge casting isn't so much of an issue in Paul Thomas Anderson films, particularly Paul Thomas Anderson's early movies. Like I said, Boogie Nights and Magnolia, which had these huge casts. But for me, it's become an increasing problem now with Wes Anderson films. I get other directors do it, but for me, it's particularly noteworthy with Wes Anderson and his latest movies, which is why I call it the Wes Anderson Problem, and why I mentioned it in relation to Barbie and Oppenheimer, because in particular, Barbie, that was one of my big problems with that film. I mean, I had other problems with Barbie. It felt like I was trying to be all these different movies. It felt like I was trying to be a musical, a rom-com. I felt about family, I felt about sisterhood, and all these different things. I was trying to be the Truman Show as well. But another big problem I had with Barbie, which I didn't speak about in my review of that, was the huge cast and how it became an unengaging experience watching that movie, because I kept going, oh, they're famous, they're famous, they're famous. Where do I know them from? Oh, I know them from whatever. You understand the point I'm making. And the thing is, The Bear Season 2, which I reviewed the other day, which I reviewed maybe yesterday on this channel, depending on when this podcast comes out. I don't always plan the release of these podcasts, but The Bear, which I reviewed recently on this channel, Bear Season 2, that had a lot of famous guest stars, and I'm not going to spoil who in case people haven't seen the show yet, but The Bear Season 2 had a lot of famous actors in, particularly Season 2, Episode 6 of The Bear, which had this Christmas family dinner flashback episode, which, as I've already said in my review of The Bear Season 2, is honestly probably the best single episode of TV I've seen in the past couple of years, maybe ever. But the thing is, in that episode, there's loads of famous actors, and when you're watching the first, let's say, 5 minutes of that episode, maybe 10 minutes of that episode, bear in mind, the episode is the longest episode of The Bear in its entirety. It's about an hour and 5 minutes, but when you're watching the first 5 to 10 minutes of that episode, you're going, oh, that's them, you know, that's such and such a body, that's such and such a body, that's thingy off that movie. You are thinking that when you're watching that first 5 to 10 minutes of Season 2, Episode 6 of The Bear, but the thing is, in The Bear, all the actors just sink into their roles, and you don't feel like you're watching these acts anymore. You feel like you're watching the characters they're playing, because the performances are so on point. And I think The Bear made it work. It embraced that idea. You know, at the start of the episode, I think you're meant to go, oh, they're famous, they're famous, they're famous. That's thingy, that's, wow, I don't know how they got that huge star to be in this episode. I think you're meant to think that at the start of that episode of The Bear, but then, as the episode progresses, they do something, well, the actors do something with their roles which completely take your mind off the fact that you're watching this really famous actor, this Oscar-winning actress, I won't say who, but there's an Oscar-winning actress in that episode, and, you know, it doesn't become a problem. That's the point. And I think The Bear made that work. And I do think there are many instances, as already mentioned in film as well, in the case of Magnolia and Boogie Nights, but there's plenty of instances which I can't think of off the top of my head right now, but there's plenty of instances in film, as I'm saying, that it doesn't become a problem anymore. It doesn't. You know, Wolf of Wall Street was a good example. There's loads of famous actors in that film, but I'm not feeling like I'm getting unengaged by that because of the way the actors are playing their characters, and I don't feel like I'm watching the actors. I feel like I'm watching the characters they are playing. I've got other problems with Wolf of Wall Street, but that's not one of them. But in the case of Barbie, I did feel that. And Barbie, for me, had a bit of that Wes Anderson problem. And so did Oppenheimer a bit. You know, that was my only problem. That was my biggest problem with Oppenheimer. And that's saying something, because it's not even that big of a problem. I got over it after about the hour mark in the film. I got over it. But I'm not going to sit here and say it wasn't a problem, though. I was sitting there in the first, as I mentioned, as I've already said, hour of this movie, in the first half of the film, maybe even with Oppenheimer, going, oh, they're famous, they're famous, they're famous. Where do I know them from? Just trying to make that, make that connection between where I've seen him before in something else. Oh, that's right, that's Matthew Modine, who plays the Freudian Doctor in Stranger Things. He's in some. Well, that's Dane DeHaan, who played Green Goblin in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and was also in, what other movie was in? I forgot off the top of my head right now, but that's, or you see what I mean though? I feel like I'm doing it now. I'm just thinking about the cast of Oppenheimer and going, oh, where do I know them from? Where do I know them from? Where do I know him from? Where do I know him from? And, I just go on and on and on, and it becomes a bit of an annoying experience sometimes with movies with huge casts. Right, so this is an add-on. One thing I forgot to mention when I was doing my podcast on the Wes Anderson Problem and how it relates to Barbie and Oppenheimer is the Wes Anderson Problem in relation to animated films which have a huge voice cast full of loads of famous actors. And Wes Anderson has done animated films in the past with the likes of Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isles of Dogs. I've seen Isles of Dogs, but I've only seen Fantastic Mr. Fox once, and it didn't really bother me in that. And I will say as well, whenever I watch a animated TV show like, say, The Simpsons, it doesn't really bother me in that either. Maybe because there isn't really too many huge stars or too many huge actors, doing voiceover roles in that show. Although you do get famous actors that come in to do cameos and supporting roles in some episodes of The Simpsons, but they almost always play themselves, or if they're not, there's always a bit of an inside joke, like Kelsey Grammer does a voice of Sideshow Bob, who's a recurring character in The Simpsons, and there's one episode of The Simpsons in particular where they make a couple of jokes about Kelsey Grammer and how Sideshow Bob sounds like Frasier from Frasier and how he sounds like Frasier from Cheers. So, there's some inside jokes like that in The Simpsons, so it doesn't really bother me in that because they kind of embrace it for the most part. But then you do get some instances like, say, the Lego movie or like, say, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and those are films I like, by the way, and there's probably plenty of other instances as well, like most recently Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, where you get these famous actors, these great actors doing voiceover roles, and it can be a bit distracting for like the first, as I've already said with many other movies, the first 5 to 10 minutes. But for the most part, if animated movies, it's never really an issue for me. For the most part, it's never really an issue for me because I can get over it. And if the voice acting is good, it won't remind you of the actor. And I thought, for the most part, it was good in the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I thought everybody was doing good voice acting in that film. Yes, even Chris Pratt and even Charlie Day and even Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong, which I know some people had problems with. I know some people had problems with those voice acting roles in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, but it didn't really bother me. And from what I remember, it didn't really bother me with the Lego movie or the Lego Batman movie for that matter. It's never really been a problem with me with animated films, but at the same time though, ask me that question in about a year's time and I might have a different answer. Because, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it more, I don't know, maybe it will be. Maybe it will be a problem going forward now I've made this video. Anyway, back to the podcast at hand. Right, so this is another add-on, yes, another add-on. I've just been going through this podcast on the Wes Anderson Problem, as I call it, and I realise that I keep saying it's when a film has a huge cast, and I don't just mean all films with huge casts give me this problem. It's when it has a huge, famous cast. Hopefully made that point clear during the podcast, but I just wanted to clarify that point up just in case people get confused and were thinking that I go into every single movie with a huge cast and have this experience. No, it's mainly just when the huge cast in the film is famous, like you get many Wes Anderson films nowadays, or many recent Wes Anderson films anyway, and that is when the problem really starts to take over me. It's not when a film has a huge cast. In fact, when a film has a huge cast but they are relatively unknown actors, I get into it a lot more. Like, it's not a film, but when it happened with The Boys, because The Boys has a relatively unknown cast to a certain degree. There's some big actors in that show, but the cast members are certainly more unknown or lesser known than, there's some of the cast members in Barbie. So when it happened in The Boys, I got into a lot more because I didn't really know these actors. But then with a Wes Anderson film, as I already mentioned, I'm going, oh, it's such and such a body, such and such a body, such and such a body. I know them. Where do I know them from? That's what it feels like. So it's with famous actors more. It's not with unknown actors as much, or lesser known actors, should I say. But anyway, back to the podcast at hand. It sort of happened with June, all the way back in 2021. I don't know why I keep saying all the way back in 2021, like, making it sound like it was 10 years ago, but it sort of happened with the first June, and I'm a bit nervous that it's going to happen with June Part 2, because that's got an even bigger cast. We've got the likes of Christopher Walken, Florence Pugh, and Austin Butler coming into that movie, newcomers, and Zendaya has a much bigger role, so I'm slightly worried that it's going to happen with that movie, but fingers crossed. I have a similar experience with June Part 2 as I had with Oppenheimer, where it only affects me for the first half of the film. I can get over that. It's when it's affects me for the whole of the movie, like what happened with Barbie, and I find it a very unengaging and at times annoying experience. And it's just me. I know it's probably just me. And I know a lot of people probably love the fact that loads of these films have these huge casts. It might be a huge attraction to many people. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing famous people in movies. It's often seeing famous actors in movies, not just famous people. Seeing famous actors in movies. Seeing actors I love in movies or TV shows. In many cases, it's the thing that attracts me to a film or TV show. Like, if I see Ewan McGregor in something, the chances are I'm going to watch it. If I see Cillian Murphy in something, the chances are I'm going to watch it. If I see, I'm trying to think of another actor I love off the top of my head right now, if I see Colin Farrell in something, the chances are I'm going to watch it. But the thing is, though, when I watched Colin Farrell in, say, I don't know, The Batman, I didn't feel like I was watching him. I felt like I was watching The Penguin, probably because he doesn't look anything like Colin Farrell in The Batman. But take another example, like Colin Farrell in The Banshees of Inisherin. I don't feel like I'm watching Colin Farrell. I can get over the fact that it's Colin Farrell within the first 5 minutes because of how well he sinks into that character, how well he just takes over that character. And yet, I don't feel the same. And I hate to say it because I think she's a really good actress, but I don't feel the same about Margot Robbie in Barbie. And I don't feel the same about many actors in Wes Anderson films. To the point now that when Bill Murray shows up in a Wes Anderson film, all I'm seeing is Bill Murray. And I love Bill Murray. I know he's a bit controversial now, but I still love him as an actor. But I can't lie. Whenever I see him in a Wes Anderson film, all I see is Bill Murray. Whenever I see Frances McDormand in a Wes Anderson film, all I see is Frances McDormand. Whenever I see Edward Norton in a Wes Anderson film, all I see is Edward Norton. Whenever I see Jason Schwartzman in a Wes Anderson film, all I see is Jason Schwartzman. Same with Owen Wilson, because these actors keep coming back for Wes Anderson films, and it's getting to the point now where I feel like I'm watching more of a family dinner with a Wes Anderson film than actual actors playing characters. Which is the same to say, because, as I mentioned, I'm a fan of Wes Anderson. I consider myself a fan of Wes Anderson's movies because of his unique style, his filmmaking, which is emulating George Méliès from, early cinema, from the early 1900s. I love his style of filmmaking. I think it's so unique. I don't like what AI and what TikTok has been doing to his films. I think that's just a load of, pardon my French, shit. But the point I'm making is I am a fan of Wes Anderson's filmmaking, and I'm a fan of many of his early movies. But I can't say I'm loving his later ones, particularly because of the huge casts. Although saying that, I did love Grand Budapest Hotel. I know I had a huge cast, and I know that's kind of contradicting what the point I've been making in this podcast today, but I did still love Grand Budapest Hotel, though, because I thought that was such a wonderful movie. And I also still love The Royal Tenenbaums, which has a huge cast, and that's one of Wes Anderson's early films, and that's got the likes of Bill Murray, Gwyneth Paltrow, Owen Wilson, Luke Wilson, Angelica Houston, and Danny Glover, and so on and so on and so on. Gene Hackman, Ben Stiller, it's got a huge cast. and I still love that movie. So I'm slightly contradicting myself, and it doesn't happen all the time with movies with huge casts, but it can happen quite a bit. In fact, one of the examples I haven't really spoken about in this podcast is when it happens with a Marvel movie. That it can happen with a Marvel movie a lot. It can happen with a Marvel movie because it got to the point in some Marvel movies where like, yeah, I just feel like I'm watching Robert Downey Jr. now. But you've got the point I'm making. I call it the Wes Anderson problem because I associate it with Wes Anderson the most. And for me, it's when his films have these huge casts and I can't differentiate between the actor and the character, and I just feel like I'm watching the actor, and it becomes quite an unengaging experience. And that's what happened with me in the first half of Oppenheimer, and that's what happened with my viewing experience in the first in the entirety of Barbie, to be honest. And I know it's just a me problem, but if you do share this problem, please let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to know if I'm not alone. But it's a problem that I wanted to talk about for a while on the channel, and I have brought this problem up in other reviews in the past, but I particularly wanted to bring up now when we've got two films in the cinema which have these gigantic casts. I particularly want to bring it up now because, yeah, I think it's an interesting topic of conversation. But for me, I call it the Wes Anderson problem because I associate with Wes Anderson films, particularly his more recent films, the most. But let me know your thoughts on that problem in the comment section below, because I'd love to hear whether you like the fact that these movies have these enormous casts, or whether you find it unengaging, similar to me. But anyway, that is it for the podcast today. And I'm going to tell you something right now. I just realised I wasn't actually recording this podcast audibly. So the version that I put on, the audible version of this podcast that I put on Spotify will just be my my video recording, but audioized. I don't even know if that's a word, but an audio version of this video recording. Usually I record it on my laptop at the same time, but I seem to have forgotten to press the record button. So there we go there. But anyway, thank you as always for watching or listening. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast, and let me know your thoughts on, as already mentioned, the Wes Anderson problem, my Wes Anderson problem, in the comment section of this podcast below. And yeah, thank you as always for watching or listening, and I suppose this is it. So I will see you guys again soon, but bye for now. Bye.